5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, ignition, liftoff.
You're listening to Relentless. This is the show for high performers who are driven and committed to being at their best. Nick Peterson and Jonathan Montgomery, co-founders of Relentless Dietetics, are your hosts.
Welcome to the Relentless Podcast. I'm Nick Peterson, hanging out again today with Jonathan Montgomery.
What is up?
And the Dr. Trevor Cashy.
Hello.
As per usual, we are here to discuss getting a little bit better every day. We're going to discuss that today by exploring how to recognize and understand higher level consequences to make higher level decisions. By and large, people greatly overweight the first order consequence of a decision. Takes time, takes money, all the reasons you do or don't want to do something, and ignore the effects of the second, third, and subsequent order consequences, which is the long-term effects of whatever you do. Oftentimes, the first order consequence is the distraction. It's hey, I gotta go out with my friends. It's, hey, this bed is really warm. I'm going to stay in it. And we don't consider or weigh the longer term effects of that decision.
In a lot of ways, I find this kind of similar to the whole shiny object syndrome and program hopping. That's pretty pervasive in our field specifically. And that's just failing for the allure of something new in an effort to make changes instead of sticking with anything long enough to cultivate a lasting result. And this kind of happens typically while ignoring the common denominator in all of their endeavors and hoping for a quick fix without really addressing the main root cause, and that's yourself. It involves people kind of succumbing to the allure of the instant gratification and ignoring the long-term success brought on by delayed satisfaction. Choosing either pleasure now or, in a lot of cases, the avoidance of a perceived pain and discomfort versus actually digging deeper into that decision and seeing what are the long-term ramifications or what accomplishment and success can come from trusting that process. Achievement of your actual goals and desires versus what you feel in that moment instantaneously. And I think that's really the crucial flaw with making decisions solely based on focusing on the first order consequence or the first reaction and not really further investigating them and following through with them, is kind of missing out on what you truly want versus what you kind of think you're going to get making the decision at first.
Yeah, and these first order effects, the first order consequences of whatever decisions you make often have the opposite desirabilities in the second, third, and subsequent order. So the desirable long-term consequences or effects, looking better, feeling better, making more money, being financially stable, better social life, all of these things require that undesirable short-term consequence or effect. Time, sacrifice, maybe you have to read a book, maybe you stay in when your friends are going out. All these things that short-term are undesirable. And that's kind of how, if you make decisions, if you overweigh that first decision or that first effect, you could see how your long-term plans probably aren't going to shake out.
I agree. This is kind of what separates us from the animals, guys. As you can use the primitive part of your brain, so to speak. It's the food, sex, sleep, fight, run, what have you. And then there's the human part where there's the capacity to abstract. And those things are typically pulling against each other rather than working together. And being able to conceptualize what happens when you make a decision is really, really super higher level thinking. Like Nick was saying, these first, second, third, fourth order consequences, this is where being cognitively aware is really effective. Because it's not necessarily how you feel about a decision, right? Because you decide, you have this thought, right? And this thought is, I'm going to do this or I'm not going to do this, right? And it's not really how you feel about it because you go, well, I don't want to go to the gym, okay? But it's not that feeling that should drive your decision. It is the feeling about your feeling. So if your initial feeling is, I don't want to do this, well, then you have to take another step and say, why do I not want to do this? And that allows you to start the decision tree to make a determination whether or not the lasting consequences are making up for the initial shock or negative or positive feeling you have about a decision you're going to make. So if you say, man, I really don't want to go work out, and you say, why don't I want to work out? And you go, well, maybe I want to sleep more today because I'm feeling lazy. Or maybe I broke my leg yesterday. And then from there, the decision tree transfers further. Is it rational to go train? Or is it me trying to make an excuse to not go? And it's the initial feeling doesn't make as much of a difference as much as how do you feel about the feeling you just had. And that is definitely like some meta crap going on, but it's the backbone of a lot of like this cognitive awareness stuff to help you make these decisions.
The feels on the feels.
John Carlton and Ray Dalio are two of the people that I like to read about the most. And John Carlton calls it your lizard brain versus like your human brain. And Ray Dalio just considers, I think like most people, the lower level, the higher level. It's that instantaneous and then having the capacity to say, wait, what are the long-term consequences of this?
I think for me, of all people, Grant Cardone has actually really nailed this embracing the deeper ramifications of your decision when he just says you don't always have to like what you're doing to love why you're doing it. And that kind of goes back on digging a little bit deeper. As you guys all know, I'm pretty partial to saying, is the juice worth the squeeze when it comes to making decisions and deciding if you're willing to accept the outcome of them? And, you have a choice. You fall for that temptation, or you choose to dig a little bit deeper and not let that momentary reaction derail you from thinking it through and achieving the positives on the back end that you're really after. And I think that, like Trevor said, that's what separates us from the animals sometimes.
Yeah, and I think practically, like in the real world, exercise is a great example because everybody kind of knows the pain and the time and the benefits long term. It's not super abstract. And it's just one of those things where the first order consequence of exercising is, yeah, it kind of hurts. It's kind of uncomfortable. You have to go. People are watching you. There's other stuff you'd rather do, like take a nap. And it's not super desirable to go to the gym. And we can talk about how much we don't want to train. None of us really want to. But the second and the subsequent consequences are, yeah, we're healthier. We're building these habits. It's becoming automatic. We all look better than we used to, which is awesome. A little bit more energy, a little bit more control over your day to day, a little bit more consistency. And so those are just the things that you have to weigh. And on the flip side, if you don't exercise, you don't have to go through that pain. You don't have to look awkward at the gym. You don't have to spend that time. You can take a nap. But we all know what happens when you've never been to the gym and you don't get up and go for a run or a walk every now and then.
This is a good one because it still surprises me when I find out that people think, Nick, Trevor, myself, that we absolutely love working out each and every day and look forward to every session. I like training. Don't get me wrong. I wouldn't do it if I hated it and couldn't stand it, was miserable. But, it's just not the case that every day it's 100% what I want to do. If you think there aren't days that I wouldn't rather take a nap or play Xbox for a couple hours rather than lift or run or ruck or do something ridiculous, you're just mistaken. But I dig a little bit deeper, and like Trevor said, I address my feelings on the feels. We may not always love training. We may not always enjoy it or look forward to it every day. There might be some days I can't stand it, but we do it, not necessarily because we like it, but because we just believe it's worth it. And I think that's what really separates those that succeed and those that wish for success are the ones that are willing to kind of just dig a little bit deeper and go, man, is the end game worth this momentary discomfort?
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I've looked at when Trevor and I used to train together. We'd look at each other like, I guess we have to go do this now. I'd stomp around the gym and talk about how much exercise sucks, but we know we got to do it. And again, it just goes back to no, I don't want to do this. What are the feels about my feels? That's also another point for environment, right? Being surrounded by people that say, yeah, let's go do this crap together, even though we don't want to, because we understand the long-term benefit.
I'd like to bring up, too, that this is also a great pull back or pull through or pull into, whatever phrase you want to use, Really, especially people who already have some sort of a groove, which arguably is the most difficult thing to have. Like, it's tough to get started, but then once you get some momentum, it's great. It's not typically, let's to roll with the exercise example. It's not necessarily, I don't think, I'll speak for us both here since we lived and trained together for a while. It's not necessarily that we didn't want to train. It's that all of the other things in our life were taking away from our capacity to train. And that may either be because we were overextending in other areas or just blatantly neglectful. Like, maybe I decided to, learn to draw a little bit better one night and decided to sleep less. And then because of that, I said, man, I don't like exercise. When really it's not exercise's fault at all, right? I just decided to make decisions the previous days and weeks that have detracted from my recovery and added back-end fatigue. Meaning the decision that I'm making now doesn't really cause me any problems right now, but it does cause me problems later. And then I decide to blame the activity I would have otherwise participated in on a behavior that happened hours, days, or weeks before. So when we said, man, training sucks, we don't want to train, to me it was like, man, I probably shouldn't have watched YouTube all night last night.
That is the benefit of having the awareness of those consequences. Because Trevor is a higher level thinker, he can say, maybe I shouldn't watch YouTube. And that is why 4 days later I feel horrible, right? That's the second, third, fourth, fifth order consequence of staying up all night watching American Idol or whatever it is you watch on YouTube, Bill Nye.
People like to do physical activities that make them feel good. And there are environmental and behavioral conditions outside of participating in those activities that make it seem less appealing. And it's not the activity itself that's unappealing. It's just becoming aware of the decisions you've made in the weeks before that may decrease your motivation to participate in something right now.
If you're ready to get the body you desire without depriving yourself of the foods you enjoy, download your free diet playbook now at www.relentlesspodcast.com.
One of the things, too, is this, and once you do it, you realize it's not bad because the second, third, fourth order consequences are so beneficial, but food. Measuring, controlling your food. We all know what happens when you don't do it. You end up in the place where a lot of people are, where they're pretty miserable about what's going on. But the pain or the perceived consequence of tracking your food, having any kind of portions, weighing your food, having any kind of control is so overweighted that people never even recognize the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth order, the consequences that spill over to the rest of your life and make it so much better.
I mean, yeah, let's be honest, weighing and measuring your food, we all do it. We all do it every day. It has a cost. Planning your meals, hitting your parameters, it takes some time. It adds a little bit of difficulty to your day. But what you really have to decide is the stress of weighing your food, tracking, counting calories, and making progress. Is it greater or less than the stress of not achieving your goals? Of waking up every day and not liking what you see in the mirror, how your clothes fit, hating how you perform. I mean, not even being able to tie your shoes or climb a flight of stairs without getting out of breath. We've talked to people that didn't want to take their kids to the beach or the pool because they were embarrassed of being seen without a parka. Same thing. We've dealt with people not having the confidence to be in front of an audience or dreading the thought of anyone seeing you naked. I mean, all of these things sound far worse to me than spending a few minutes of your day planning your meals and busting out a scale. The freedom that I found through structure and this kind of control has been incredibly liberating. And, I wake up literally ecstatic every day to no longer feel bad about life. It's just one of those things where, the first reaction, even some days this day, close to 4 years of tracking my food and 1,200 plus days of consecutive MyFitnessPal. Yeah, there's some days I don't want to do it. But when I think about why I don't want to do it versus what I'm going to get from it, it really becomes an easy decision for me, and the benefits far outweigh the consequence, and like I always say, if the juice is worth the squeeze, you go ahead and squeeze. And in this case, for me, that choice is incredibly clear.
Yeah, absolutely. The front-loaded stress to relieve a ton of stress in the future is a pretty easy trade if you know how to weigh it appropriately. Trevor has front-loaded a ton of stress. He got his PhD when he was like 17 or something like that. What are the second, third, fourth, fifth order, subsequent order consequences of that? What is that? Do you feel like front-loading that stress was worth it? I'm really curious more than anything else.
Yeah, that's a good question to ask. And to be completely truthful, my people that know me know that my chronology is kind of weird, and that, maybe I kind of shaved 10 years off of some processes, but I also kind of wonder, did I just take 10 years off of my life? And did I take that off the back end? But, then it's like, oh, those are the wheelchair years anyway. Who cares, right? So at the point in my life where I was at, front loading all of that work was definitely beneficial to me, because I was and am so hyperactive in certain ways that if I wasn't doing that, I would be doing other things that were self-destructive. And I just took all that energy out on something that was essentially socially acceptable. So I think it allowed me to wrap back to a previous episode. Going through the motions that I did allowed me to figure out what I was good at and what I wasn't, and how to focus my energy now, when a lot of people, my age now or even then, were still kind of fiddling around, self-identity. What do I want to do with my life? That sort of stuff. I just started dealing with that self-identity and existential crisis and all that stuff way earlier than other people. So by the time I was done, my actual chronology versus my biological chronology was probably a 10 to 15 year differential, where I graduated and I was 40 in the head, and, was 22 actually. And so the way that I made decisions was probably, probably closer to the way a middle-aged man might versus a frat boy, which I made all those decisions when I was 15. So if that makes sense, I think it kind of forced a little bit of maturity. I don't know whether that's good or bad, but that's what happened.
Well, I think it's apparent that you've been a higher level thinker for longer than I have, for example, because when I was 16, 17, 18, I was not willing to give up the beer and the girls and the staying up late. And I kind of kicked myself in the head and say, man, it must be nice to have your PhD when you're 20 something.
Yeah. And that's typically where I reply, I wouldn't wish it on anybody. But yeah, if you see that as a perceived benefit, and some people do, I would totally agree. Where I'm like, man, I should have spent more time with girls instead of obsessing over non-small cell lung cancer, metastasis and microRNA, and I'm like, I liked stuff that other people didn't like. And instead of, me getting discouraged, it just forced me into more obscurity.
Yeah, to me, it's that higher level thinking, that ability to say it's worth not blowing stuff up and chasing girls to be a useful human later on.
To be fair, I totally blew stuff up.
I know.
I went through my blowing stuff up phase to determine that maybe blowing stuff up for a living was not for me. So yeah, that was definitely finding my strengths. I've made my fair share of explodey things for sure. But yeah, honestly, this was like, I was able, my BS detector was pretty good. And I got a lot of that from my father. And really I know that the end game here is more cool stuff for me. But what I didn't understand was the instant gratification portion, which I didn't call it that then. It's that, playing video games or smoking pot or chasing tail, all those things are there's no build up there, right? Like there's no ladder of ascension, or at least not one that I could I could comprehend at that age, or even really comprehend now. But it's like, if I learn this, then I can learn this, and then I can learn this, and then pretty soon I know I don't know anything. But the point is that there is definitely a way to expand myself mentally and physically where the ceiling was much higher than trying to get a high score on a video game or trying to get attention from certain people. There's really, the end game there has a much lower ceiling, and that wasn't very stimulating for me, so it wasn't worth it.
Yeah, I think that basically sums it all up, not just in a nutshell, but in practical application of somebody really embracing that higher level thinking and having the ability to see the long game, maybe not the entire long game. I'm sure at 14, when you started college, you weren't necessarily going, I will have my PhD at 22 or 23, but you knew that if I unlock this, then I can achieve this. And there's something behind that door and behind that door. And you just realized that that was a much more suitable pursuit for you than just succumbing to whatever was shiny sitting next to you at the time. And that's impressive.
I think I lucked out a little bit in terms of making those decisions because I was able to see the long game before the distractions became appealing. So if I was like, man, if I do this, then I can't take anatomy 3, so looking back, I do think there's a bit of luck there because my interests were probably a bit opposite, where when the more instant gratification sort of decisions came into my life after my interest in long-term stuff, it was a matter of, well, if I make this decision, will it pull away from what I'm currently doing? And that decision, admittedly, is a little bit easier than saying, well, if I make this decision, will it keep me from starting something else? So if you can differentiate between those two things, if you're already on a right path, whatever you want to consider that, it's easier to make the decision as to whether or not you want to make a decision to go off track, and that makes it a little more clear versus making a decision that might prevent you from getting on the right track to begin with.
Right. That's perfect. I just think about process, right? Once you get in the process, like school, you build this upon this, upon this, upon this, and so on and so forth. It's much easier to say, no, that's a distraction from the process. And that kind of leads to we have an inner circle where we work really, really closely with members of ours. And that's probably the thing they struggle with the most is they get in this process. They start making progress and then they get faced with decisions like normal, everyday life decisions, not like getting your PhD when you're 12, but, where their process is taking them somewhere they've always wanted to be. And their real life is trying to pull them off track. Hey, let's go out drinking. Come on, you can't just eat this whole pizza with us this one time. Like that kind of stuff. And I kind of want Jonathan to expand on it because we have one or two members in particular that are really struggling with this. Oh my gosh, I can't believe this progress I'm making. My life is so much better. But my friends want me to do this or my friends want me to do that.
Yeah, I can think of one person in particular, and she's struggled with this quite a bit, and over time has simply been able to overcome it through some effort and dedication to her goals, and just simply not letting others plot her course. To be able to find that balance between perceived social obligations and those to her commitments to herself, and a lot of it touches on what Trevor said. Once you're moving in a direction, staying in that direction comes to be a little bit more intuitive because you've already seen the benefits of that self-sacrifice. But being around people that aren't making those same high order decisions, that aren't focusing on the big picture, it can be tough. Whether or not they're jealous of your success or just not focused on the same path, it's not for them. Or they're simply not willing to resist that pull of instant gratification. Being the one that always has to say no to that temptation, to follow suit and do their plan, it can add some stress to your life. But just like anything else, any other decision you face, it simply comes down to deciding what you want. There's going to be some stress in telling your friends you don't want to go out drinking every weekend, or that you can't go crush the all-you-can-eat chicken wing challenge. But if you have goals, you got to balance what stress is more important to you and what stress is greater. If you have changes you want to make and you have aspirations that you seek to accomplish, that momentary stress on the front end is going to pale in comparison to that relief felt as you make progress towards achieving those goals. And that's one of the things we like to encourage. And it's just like Trevor said, if he would have opted for this decision, it would have prohibited this decision. You've got to have that ability to peel back that first order consequence and actually analyze how you feel about your feels so you can make the right decision for you in the long term. And really, you're the only one that can figure that out. You've got to make that determination. But until you've given yourself the chance to actually analyze why you make the decisions you make and start looking down the road a little bit, you're probably always going to sell yourself short.
Yeah, I think understanding that your lizard animal brain is going to say, I want this now, and having the ability to stop and say, what does my evolved human brain want as a high level thinker? That's going to be what you want most. And they're not always the same thing. So it's really determining, like you hear Jonathan say all the time, is the juice worth the squeeze? Is this to do what you want now or not do what you want now is going to be a little bit of stress for the next few hours, maybe a few days. If you don't get what you want most, you're going to stress about it the rest of your life. And that's a trade-off you have to. If Trevor never got his PhD, I'm sure he'd be losing his mind over it. And that's just a trade-off that he made and he understood very, very young. So again, when weighing these decisions, every time you make a decision from now on, every one of you that's listening, I want Jonathan's voice in your head.
Is the juice worth the squeeze?
That's what I want. And then I want Trevor giggling in the background too. Every single time you make a decision, that's the process.
It's mad scientist.
You've been listening to the Relentless Podcast. Now, if you've enjoyed this episode and you want to keep getting a little bit better every day, do us a favor, head over to iTunes, subscribe, leave us an honest review, and be sure not to miss the next one.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.